All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Jason Flame, and welcome to Master Motivation here on this Monday. We are joined by not one, but two great martial artists here today. We have Grandmaster Jeff Smith and Grandmaster Stephen Oliver. Jeff Smith is one of the, if not the most talented martial artists of all time. Champion, innovator, manager, teacher, coach, mentor, and leader. On June 17th, 2016, Jeff Smith was awarded the rank of Grandmaster by the Professional Karate Commission with his 10th degree black belt by Grandmasters Glenn Keeney and Alan Steen, with the additional signatures and approval of Pat Johnson and J. Pat Burleson. One of the most popular and highly respected martial artists in the world, Grandmaster Jeff Smith, has influenced millions of martial artists around the world, both directly and indirectly. It's a pleasure and honor to have you on the show, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I haven't done this where I have two guests at the same time, so I'm kind of toggling between some different different screens here.
Yeah.
But I love the hat, by the way. I love the. I'm always wearing Under Armour American flag.
And Jason, I'll bail out here in a second and leave you two to it. But I might add to that introduction of Grandmaster Smith here. Jeff, you and I have known each other since what, 19? I hate to say it, but probably 71 or 70 or something like that.
70s anyway. We can just say that.
Yeah, I started with the Junior Institute in 1969, and you probably flew to Tulsa first in the early 70s and beat the crap out of me more than once. But, he has the record of the most watched fight ever in the history of martial arts, the best of my knowledge, Kareem Allah versus Jeff Smith for the heavyweight title that Don King promoted on the undercard for the Ali Frazier fight. And, really was at the forefront of point karate in the United States, then was at the forefront of kickboxing in the United States. But for our purposes, Jason, we have a mutual interest in growing martial arts school businesses and growing the martial arts school business. He started in running a professional school when you were 15, 16, Master Smith, or maybe not, we would consider that professional, but ran the Junior Institute for many years with a big chain of 13 locations, multi-million-dollar operation in Washington, D.C., then ran his own chain of world champion Jeff Smith martial arts schools. And now he's the head instructor for our franchise organization, Mile High Karate, and the chief operating officer. But he's also, our lead coach on the martial arts wealth mastery, and has been belly to belly, face to face, doing sales, teaching, every aspect of a martial arts school business. I'll say I'm at 40 years and you're at 50 years. So for any number of years now, I mean, there's a tremendous base of experience. And one thing that was interesting about Jeff is he always knew that the fighting wasn't going to be the primary career. And so was always running the professional side of the business. And therefore there wasn't much of a transition between fighting and martial arts school operations, because he's professionally running a martial arts school while in parallel fighting, rather than, what a lot of fighters do is they, the career comes to an end and now it's, what do I do next?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, thank you for adding to the introduction and giving us a little bit more history. We got a bunch of people watching, by the way. So those of you that are watching here, whether you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook, shoot us a quick comment. Let us know you're there. And by the way, if you have any questions, we'd love to have some questions throughout the interview. So yeah, there's just so much for us to talk about. I almost don't know where to get started, but I think probably that biggest thing was being on that undercard on the Ali fight, the Thrilla in Manila. Talk about that experience of what it was like to fight in the ring in front of all those people.
Well, and again, it was kind of a unique situation for me to actually even be in the fight, because Joe Louis was actually supposed to be fighting Kareem Allah, who was, one of Don King's, fighters, and he was under contract with Don King. He was also one of Ali's sparring partners, but was also a martial artist in New York City that had a big reputation in New York. Kevin Thompson, who probably a lot of people out there know who he is, KA, or little Kareem is what they used to call him, and called him KA, was his number one fighter back in when he was when he was a toddler, at 7, 8 years old, and was winning all tournaments all the way up through, and was in the NASCA circuit and was number one, and for years in the regular division in forms and fighting and weapons, and was on the Paul Mitchell team and all those other stuff. But that was one of his top proteges. And Kareem had quite the reputation in New York with going in and taking over the tournaments and winning all the divisions with his fighters. Mm-hmm. So he's supposed to fight Joe Louis, and Joe Louis already had a fight scheduled with Ross Scott defending his world PKA title against Ross Scott, who was a young up-and-comer out of Indiana, one of Glenn Keeney's fighters. And it just so happens in the second or third round, Joe dislocated his shoulder, and Ross Scott proceeded to pound him for a round after round. And even though he didn't knock him out, he did beat Joe up pretty good, because Joe only had one arm, right? And Ross was a big boy, about 250 and big legs, and was just pounding Joe. And Joe was so beat up and his shoulder was so bad that there was no way he was going to be able to fight that fight in 6 or 8 weeks. So he recommended to Don King to get me instead of Ross Scott, because nobody knew Ross Scott. He was a young and up-and-comer and kind of a farm boy. And he said, you should have Jeff Smith. Everybody knows Jeff Smith. He's the world champion in the light heavyweight division. So I said, sure. When they offered it to me, I said, sure, I'll fight him. Of course, I was 175 then, and Kareem was 220, and he was about 6'2", and I'm about 5'11". So I did give away some weight and some height, but for me back then, I didn't care about size. I always came from the school of the bigger they are, the harder they fall, rather than the bigger they are, the harder you fall, right? But that's kind of how that whole thing came about. And then when we fought on the card, and we did a lot of press conferences all over the country, in New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., with Muhammad and Kareem, and they had all kinds of special events in New York and Chicago at Elijah Muhammad's house, where all the Hollywood actors, movie stars were there for it, in New York City at the Rockefeller Plaza and all. So it was quite the hype here in Washington, D.C. But ended up that 50 million people watched that fight live on closed circuit TV. Which now you can't even get those kind of audiences. The streaming and everything, there's so many different ways that stuff's coming. Don King had it all figured out. He had those closed circuit TVs in every bar and every racetrack and every stadium and movie theater all over the country and the world. And so it's something that'll probably never, ever, that's a record that'll probably never, ever be broken.
Yeah. What an amazing experience for you, but just a moment in history for everybody to hear about right now. I have to admit, I kind of feel like a little kid listening to these stories and super excited. I know that there's people that are watching going, wow, this is just like when you can hear about this kind of history and you've been involved in the martial arts and enjoy this. It's just so fun to hear. I'd like to ask a little bit more about your beginnings in martial arts and how you got involved in martial arts in the early years.
And I tell you, I came up the same way, Grandmaster Oliver did, and that's through the June Ree system. And June Ree, Master Oliver was up in Oklahoma. I was down in Texas, but that's where June Ree started, was in Texas. And when he graduated from the University of Texas, he moved to Washington, D.C. and started teaching there and opened his first school, right? But he had all these black belts from Texas, like Alan Steen and Pat Burleson and all these other guys who came up through the ranks, Fred Wren and Skipper Mullins and Demetrius Havanas and Ray McCallum and Pat Worley. And there was so many of these people that came through that whole June Ree system, through all of these people in Texas. And it just so happened in my hometown, which was about 90 miles from where June Ree was, in Austin at the University of Texas. I was in Kingsville, Texas, and one of his black belts from University of Texas was from Kingsville, and his name was Bruce Turner, and he started a program at the university in Kingsville. And my mother was working at the university. I was in middle school, junior high school, and it was only for college kids, but they let some of the faculty from the school let their kids get in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the college kids didn't want these 14 and 15 junior high and high school kids in. So back then they started sparring right at white belt. So they would proceed to beat the hell out of us. And, it's from the old school of hard knocks. You either, get tough or die, right? And so probably is what allowed me to have that type of hardcore training and make through it, which started setting the grassroots for my eventual success in the martial arts. But Jun Rhee would come down every semester and do our belt test, just like he did when Grandmaster Oliver was at Oral Roberts, right? University.
Well, we were at the YWCA, the YMCA, Oral Roberts, Tahlequah Junior College, and University of Tulsa.
So they kind of graduated through the ways, but Jun Rhee would come down each semester because he had all these black belts from Texas that went to the University of Texas and got their black belt, and then they had moved back to their hometown because people in the University of Texas come from everywhere. So that's how he spread over across the country, including Master Oliver. So that's how I got started. And when I was in my senior year at A&I, he had come down for a test, and he wanted me to come up to Washington, D.C. and teach for him. And so that's what I did in 1970. And that's how I met Grandmaster Oliver. I was doing a belt test. When Jun Rhee couldn't make some of these satellite places, he would send me. And I remember when Grandmaster Oliver was testing for his green belt, and very impressive. And then he was tested for his brown belt. And I think the brown belt was the one you had a cast on your hand.
No, it was blue belt you failed me for.
Or was it blue belt?
It was blue belt, yeah.
He had a cast on his arm.
I had 3 broken knuckles, and you failed me for our once-a-year test.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you, he could kick straight up with both legs like Bill Wallace. I mean, he was quite impressive. But, he had the cast, so he couldn't do some of this stuff. So I just said, okay, well, good. I'm glad you're going to get better. Okay, maybe by the next test you'll be good enough to do the full thing. So
Wow,
hardcore back then.
Yeah, really was.
And ultimately I'd been a brown belt, I don't know for how many years, but then traveled to Washington D.C. and stayed with you and trained out there, and then traveled out there in 1978 and spent the summer and finally tested for first degree black belt. Which I also had viral hepatitis when I tested for a black belt. So, it would be spar a couple rounds and then pass out and, be back at it. So, the good old days never were is my way of phrasing that.
And,
right.
The story there is so funny. It's when he tested for his brown belt, he said, "Can I come out to Washington, D.C. and test for my black belt next summer?" And I said, well, sure. I said, it doesn't mean you're going to pass, but you can come out if you want. And sure enough, I'm thinking he's going to fly out, right? He drives at 17. And correct me if I'm wrong on this. At 17, he takes his parents' car and drives out to Washington, D.C. On the way up, he stops in Memphis, Tennessee, which is the route that you come from Texas to Washington, D.C., and stops at Bill Wallace's school in Memphis and says, I'm on the way to Washington, D.C. to work out with Jeff Smith. I just want to stop by and say hi. And he goes, oh, great. You got your equipment in your car? Yeah, go get it. Come on in. And then he proceeded to spar an hour or two and work out with him on his journey up to Washington, D.C. to test for his black belt.
Well, what you missed with that, I was also training with Roger Green, who was Joe Lewis's first black belt, and we had just had Joe Lewis out there for a week. So I'd been training with Joe Lewis for the week with Roger Green, and then with Bill Wallace, who, I mean, I was just a long hair, boy off the street that he didn't know from Adam, and he spent literally 2.5 hours working with me and sparring and one thing or another. It was just amazingly wonderful and gregarious, same as he is today. And that was the school that was what was it, Kangaree and Elvis Presley?
Yeah, Elvis Presley owned that school.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I mean, how many kids get to at 16 or 17 get to train with Joe Louis, and a few weeks later Bill Wallace, and then a few days later with me,
and then get abused by you? They were all both really nice to no. Joe was a sadist too. We do have to admit that. So,
Well, for those of you watching now or just tuning in, we're talking to Jeff Smith and Stephen Oliver, just kind of rehashing some old stories from the early years of martial arts, and it's just such a pleasure to kind of just witness and be a part of this and have you guys on today. But we do have a question. I wanted to bring this up before he logs off. And again, if anybody else has questions, but we got Mr. Kevin Kowalczyk out in Littleton, Colorado, Revolution Martial Arts. He asks, what's the biggest challenge running a martial arts studio and a competition team? That may be two questions.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead,
I'll make a stab at it, Jeff, and then you can chip in. I think the first challenge in running a martial arts school is to get over the idea that your athletic knowledge and your teaching background qualifies you to run a successful business. And, one of the books I like from years ago is The E-Myth by Charles Gerber. And his great line is, all businesses are founded by a technician who one day had an entrepreneurial seizure. And then they come to the realization it's about marketing, it's about sales, it's about human resources, accounting, that there's an awful lot more to it than just knowing your craft, right? And what I learned in Washington, D.C. from Jeff Smith, June Reed, Nick Kokinis is how to sell, how to run the intro classes, how to do the renewal, how to focus on student retention. And I felt like I was a heck of a good instructor and a heck of a good technician when I moved out there, and suddenly learned that all the stuff I thought I knew had nothing to do with student retention, had nothing to do with creating student value, and had nothing to do with renewals and so forth. And then I figured out pretty quickly, as they were all helping me put together the business plan to move to Denver, that I didn't know anything about marketing. The reason I didn't know anything about marketing is June Reed was so good at it. June Reed was buying ads in the Washington Post constantly. He was running on TV. He was running on the Kung Fu TV series back then, all kinds of other stuff. And literally there was somebody sitting the switchboard fielding 50, 60, 70, 80 calls per location per month and just feeding us traffic. And so I had to learn how to market. Jeff will tell you, I spent probably 12 months sitting at the Library of Congress, 3, 4, or 5 hours a day studying marketing, because this is all pre-Google. And so the number one thing is to learn how to market and learn how to sell and learn how to retain students, which has nothing to do with your starting point of being a great technician. I'm sure you would agree with that, Jason.
Yeah.
The competition team thing, Master Smith's going to give a different answer than I do. And I'll answer it from the background of, for 10 years, I ran one of the biggest tournaments in the country, the Mile High Karate Classic, which was the NASCA World Tour event. And my answer to the competition team is, why would you bother with the competition team? I'm not a big fan of devoting and dividing your time. And my experience, honestly, and of course there's different styles and one thing or another in different environments, but getting a group of high-ranked students actively involved in the tournament circuit, one, takes your time and distracts from teaching the bulk of your students what they really need and really want to know. And number two, I've never seen it add to the bottom line. And number three, my view is you create a bunch of prima donnas who then typically do nothing to contribute to the school. And I know Master Smith is going to have a completely different answer to that, because he just loves the competition and the competition team. Well, but having done a lot of that, I always think it's a distraction, not a positive.
Yeah,
well, Mr. Smith, what do you think?
I would say it a different way, and that's why the success of your school. I had a successful school. Master Oliver had a successful school, and so there's not always every road is directly to the top. Sometimes you have a little detour. In the bottom line is probably at best you're going to have 10% of your students who even want to do the competition. we'd have inter-school tournaments and have to force people to go compete and stuff like that, which can backfire on you. I always did it because that was what I like to do. I liked the competition. I did the competition. I wanted my top students who saw what I did want to duplicate that. And through that, we raised a lot of national champions and world champions, both in point and full contact and in forms. I enjoyed going to the tournaments. Master Oliver did his own tournament and had to go to the other NASCA tournaments, but wasn't a fun thing for him to do.
Well, I would say it differently. I have now promoted 127 tournaments. Now, of those, 11 of them were big national tournaments and open tournaments. The rest of them all been intramural tournaments, and the intramural tournaments are very, very productive. They're very useful for our students. They become a great renewal tool, a great retention tool. But we run them like a seminar and learning environment rather than the typical open tournament environment. And unfortunately, when you go to open tournaments, a lot of times you're interacting with people who don't really represent what black belt should mean. You're creating little league parents and that type of thing. And the other thing I'd say, Matt Smith, is I very much enjoyed my time on the NASCA circuit. Some of my very best friends are, Mike Sawyer, Mike McCoy, who promote the U.S. Open, Rich Batista, who used to promote the Boston tournament, Joy Santa Maria, the New York tournament, of course, our mutual friend Joe Corley of Battle Atlanta, Larry Carnahan. I had a great time doing that and met some wonderful people. I will say, though, of all the promoters I knew, the only one who was really making a great profit from their tournament was me. And, we used to have those conversations behind the scenes. But the reason it was me was not because the tournament was raking in a ton of money. It's because I was utilizing the tournament for my own purposes, which was retention and renewal. And then as you found out with Karate Helps Kick Diabetes, you could have the same effect without having to promote an open tournament and enjoy, and invite so many different people to come in to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I agree with the inter-school tournaments and the way we control that, because I will tell you that you got to be careful who you send, what students you send to open tournaments, because they can get a nasty taste in their mouth. Some of these open tournaments, the judging and stuff is not always the best, and there's a lot of problems and complications and stuff. So we only took our top 10 to 15, 20 students to any open competitions. But we were like Master Oliver, we had our inter-school activity tournaments. And these were to give the students some experience, and those that liked it could then go to open tournaments. But I'm going to tell you, the open tournaments don't really have anything to do with your gross, but the inter-school tournaments, I really do believe that they do help give the students a purpose for training to a higher level and reward them for those extra efforts. And if you make our inter-school, we always made it an invitational. So we would invite my friends who had schools who I knew that were on our same wavelength and same style of competitiveness, without getting these people that come in that were troublemakers or complaining about everything. So you've got to take good control of who comes in, because any one school comes in can mess up all of your students in one tournament. So that's what I say about the competition team.
Yeah. And maybe going back to the starting point of the question is on the running the school, and Jason, you have a lot of experience with this as well as we do, but it's one about being good enough at marketing to get enough people in the door. And then two, it's about having a good enough retention rate. And most instructors think that they're great because they have people in their face all the time telling them how great they are. But you don't know whether you're great or not unless you're looking at what your monthly dropout numbers are. And we try to keep that at 1 to 2% a month. Most schools that I talk to are doing 8, 9, 10% a month dropout rate. So we try to keep it to, if you have 300 active students where you're losing 3 to 6 people a month. Number two is what your testing graduation rate? In other words, are 98% of the people testing on time and graduating or not? Number three, what's your renewal rate? What's the percentage of people who are renewing to higher programs and continuing on? And those are the only measures, and we could come up with some others, but really the measures of whether you're a good instructor or not is retention rate, renewal rate, testing percentages. And then the other aspect of that is almost everybody way undercharges. And what they think is that students enroll in martial arts for self-defense, or they enroll in martial arts to learn the athletics, but parents enroll their kids for personal development. Adults enroll themselves consciously or subconsciously for personal development. I always think of it as, this 27-year-old adult man who comes in for Krav Maga or for MMA or one thing or another. Really, they want to be James Bond. And their picture is they want to be cool, debonair, confident, able to speak in public, able to carry themselves in different situations. Not much of that has to do with how well they can strike or how well they can choke, but it has to do with the way they feel about themselves. And of course, with a kid, the parent is looking at, is this going to help my kids with grades? It's going to help him be immune to peer pressure, keep him off of drugs, keep her or him safe and healthy. And then the child is looking at all the exciting things and whether it's fun or not. But you put those two things together and you've got what the average adult male or adult female ultimately wants, even if they don't say that out loud when they come in the door.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all of those things, and I love it. And when you were talking about statistics and talking about quit rate, I think it was you the last time that we spoke, made me really think about my black belt retention rate, meaning how many people have enrolled in the program and made it to black belt. I went and had a staff meeting about that, and looking at those numbers, we thought we were doing real well. And now we're rethinking how we're doing it based on that statistic alone. How many people are enrolling in the program and actually making it all the way to black belt? Because I see the memes that kind of joke that, out of, 100 people testing and all this stuff. And like, I don't want that. I would love to see that retention rate go much higher. And then talking about being a black belt and talking about tournaments, it's one of the things that I love about having those options, whether it be leadership or demo team, or maybe taking on a little bit more Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Krav Maga, expanding their art or competition might be one thing that helps give them more of a focus after black belt. So I definitely I love all of that.
The example I used, and I think I mentioned to you last time, Jason, is I'd been going around all over the country doing these little seminars, and I'd been using the example of Harvard and what their graduation rate was and so forth. And I noticed people's eyes glossing over because, with Harvard, it's something like 93% of everybody who, goes in for a bachelor's degree ends up graduating with a bachelor's degree in 4 or 5 years. And it didn't resonate with martial arts. And then I started saying, who in here thinks that your retention rate is better than the worst public school system in the country, which at the time was the Detroit Public Schools? And they were graduating 43% or 45%, I forget specifically, of the kids at their high school level to their, graduate from high school. And of course, every martial arts instructor said, oh yeah, I'm much better than that. I said, well, okay. So if you did 100 new students, on an average per year, are you graduating 50 new black belts on an average per year? And of course, most of them are enrolling 100 students and they're graduating 3 black belts or 5 black belts. And it's not even in the ballpark. Right. And what the harm in the martial arts is if you were a school teacher, you were a high school administrator, you'd be fired for having those numbers quickly. I mean, in disgrace, never to get a job again. And martial artists brag about it. They brag about how great their students are and how high their standards are. Well, we're not talking about lowering standards. We keep upping the standards. But the big trick is getting them into year 2 and getting them into year 3 and getting them really committed to lifetime training, because most everybody who enrolls in martial arts drops out within 6 months. So I think the real secret is getting them into year 2, committed to train to black, and then you're usually in pretty good shape.
Yep. Well, let me throw this question out there. Kevin had another question for you guys. He said, you've seen a lot of change in the martial arts industry over the past several decades. Mr. Smith, where do you think martial arts is going in the next 5 years, the martial arts industry?
Well, the good thing about the martial arts in this country is that, back when we were doing it in the 60s and other people in the 50s, like June Reed, we've evolved, but it's like a snowball. what took 10 years to accomplish can now be accomplished in 6 months. And with the internet, with back when in the 70s, when you had Kung Fu and you had Enter the Dragon, and you had these little martial arts movies back then, or TV series, that was the only martial arts people could see. And now you turn on the TV, and everything you watch, no matter what kind of movie, there's martial arts in it. You see all the different fighting associations, PKA, which, I won the first world championship in that with Bill Wallace and Joe Louis. They were the innovator. And that's how UFC was able to get on board. And, they kind of stood on the PKA shoulders. They did thousands of hours on network TV and HBO, Showtime, special events. And off of all those fans that they got, UFC kind of took it to the next level. And now you see Bellator and K1 and all these other fighting groups. So there's all this fighting on board. Joe Corley is in the midst of is putting the PKA back together, and he's going to be doing these televised fights of what our martial arts used to be. So it's going to bring back that style of the PKA fighting that didn't have leg kicks or takedowns or grappling. And so it would showcase that excellent technique of those fighters back then, like Rick Rufus and Jean-Yves Theriault and Don Wilson and all these other great fighters, Bill Wallace and Joe Louis, etc. And so with that part, but now the thing about the martial arts industry is it's really it's a two-arm system. One is all the TV and fighting on TV and everything, and the other is the martial arts business industry of teaching kids. And now people are getting educated to know that the martial arts is not about just self-defense or kicking and punching, but it's about personal development. It's about character development for kids. And more parents are realizing that I need a strong, confident kid, and I want to teach him how to be a leader. And now they're finding out that martial arts, not all of them, but a lot of schools who have that character system can take those kids and turn them into leaders and confident young adults who accomplish so much more in life. And that's how we increase the value of our program. I kind of call it the private school versus the public school. Why would somebody spend $20,000 or $30,000 a year? And I don't think, even today's dollars, maybe 15,000 is the least I've seen in private schools. Why would somebody go pay that for their elementary school kid to go to a private school when they can go to a public school that their tax dollars have already paid for? Well, that's kind of what we do in our martial arts schools that are in our martial arts wealth mastery group. We teach them how to increase the value of their program. They don't have to compare with the other schools. Most people say, oh, we couldn't charge that in our school, in our area, in our school, because other schools are charging less. Well, think about a private school. They're charging 15 or 20, and that person comes in and goes, what, are you crazy? I can go down the street and get it free. Why should I do that? Well, those people that are doing that because of their perception of the value.
In droves in the last 20 months, by the way.
And what
I'm sorry. Yeah.
And what has happened in the last 10 years or 20 years with the growth of these kids and the success rate they've had in these private schools, how they have a higher degree of success in college and life. And so it's these life skills that you're giving these parents. And that's why the martial arts industry is going to grow even more, because we're growing bigger and bigger. We're giving more value to the programs. So the business itself will grow if you learn the business systems. And I'll tell you, the problem that most martial arts schools, and I'm talking at least 95% of them, like Master Oliver was saying earlier, they're a master of their karate or MMA or jujitsu or judo or karate, taekwondo, kempo, kung fu, all of that, but they're not a master in business.
Yeah.
And there is a karate business system that we have school owners now doing that are making over $100,000 a month at their schools. People just think we make those numbers up when they actually talk to these
700,000 a year net. Yeah.
And when they hear that these people are $1 million schools, and how do you make $1 million at a school, at a karate school? You know, these guys are struggling at 10 or 20,000 a month trying to break even. Look at the pandemic. Over half of the schools in this country went out of business during the pandemic. The other half were at least 50% down, except for the guys in our group, because they knew how to do Zoom training. We knew we had to do a 180 on our marketing. We were doing a lot of live events and that kind of marketing, and we switched to other systems of marketing where we could get to people by internet, by Google, by those Facebook type things that we can now get to them on the internet and get them in the school. So the whole system of that, how to run a school, you're this good in your martial arts and then your business is way down here. So most of them are white belts in business and then a 5th degree in martial arts and thinks that their business is going to succeed.
Yeah, and I might throw in a couple things, and I'm going to leave you guys to it. I've got to jump out here. But if Kevin's question was, how does the physical technique change over 5 years? I think it's the wrong question, because whether you're a traditional Shotokan stylist, you're an MMA school, you're a karate school, you're a kung fu school, what the student wants to learn is confidence, focus, discipline, to be healthy, to be confident in different situations. So you can be highly successful whether you're a BJJ school, and there's a bunch of $1 million a year BJJ schools that we've worked with, or you're an MMA school, or you're a traditional Shotokan stylist. And I think the mistake is to try to change what you're teaching based on whatever you think is trendy. And if you did that, everybody would have been teaching Kung Fu back in the 70s. And then they would, and there's all these different trends that have gone on, Eskrima and different things, and then Taibo, and now J, and then MMA and so forth. I don't think in Krav, I don't think it matters what your root style is, as long as you know how to operate the school. Now, if the question is the business change over the next 5 years, is, the rule is there's nothing that's steady other than change. And especially in the marketing environment, that's constantly changing. I went from hating Facebook to loving Facebook. My guess is I may end up hating it again in a couple of years. Times when Google works really well or it doesn't work really well, but all Google is the latest version of the Yellow Pages. We went through a time when you couldn't do infomercials to we were doing hundreds of enrollments from infomercials to it's pretty worthless again. So the next 5 years, and none of us have a crystal ball, but the marketing environment is going to change dramatically. But the underlying what we're teaching, why we're teaching what it is going to continue to improve. I don't think we had, great experience teaching people on Zoom, but I don't think you're ever going to replace the live in-person setting. It's useful to have that as a backup tool, but I don't think people are nearly as happy or fulfilled if they can't work, one-on-one, hands-on, be in an environment, really build a relationship with other people. So I'm not worried about, I've seen the mirror. I'm not worried about, they do a martial arts class and that's going to replace us. Certainly not for 7-year-olds. But what we have to do is stay focused on that character development side, but also be constantly learning. The business side is going to do nothing but change in the legal environment and in the marketing areas where things work. And
well, thanks for joining us on this. It's been great having both of you be able to bounce off of each other and tell some stories. I'm going to let you go because I know you got to go pick up your son.
Yep.
And I'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you as always.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Smith, let's continue the conversation just a little bit. Coming from the old school background, you trained in the early 70s and throughout the tough times. You talked about, the failing of the testing. How how do you explain this? Because there are still these instructors feeling like they're in the 70s, they're in the 80s. How do you get through to them and help them to see that change and see that
So,
evolvement?
again, I started in '64, and I started, at that Texas A&I University. And when I was a brown belt, I was still in high school, and I took the club over because I was the highest rank. Because every time somebody would get a black belt, they'd graduate, because it takes about 4 years, and you start as a freshman. So they kept graduating off. So I was the highest ranking, and even though I was in high school, now I'm running the club. Well, the first thing that I did when I took over the club is I doubled the price. And the people that were there went, "You're crazy. Why am I going to pay twice as much?" And I said, "Because they were charging too little." I said, "We include your uniform. We include your testing fee. I want to have enough money with the club to fund our competition team to travel to tournaments. So we will pay for everybody to go to the tournaments." And they said, "Well, what if they don't compete in the tournaments?" They don't have to. But the ones that want to will have their transportation provided, will pay their hotel, and will pay their entry fee. And so I did that. And we had, I guess, when I took over, about 40 students. And then I did a big demonstration at the Student Union Ballroom at the beginning of when they are getting ready to start the semester in September. And ended up signing up 100 new students. Now, we lost about half of the old ones, which I was good to get rid of them, because if they didn't think it was worth it, then we didn't want them there anyway, right? But now these new people, they didn't think it was too expensive. That's kind of what we've done with our newer schools now, is to let them understand that they're worth more than they think they are. Most martial arts schools are charging the same thing now as they did 20 years ago. And look at what cars are now. Look at what houses are now. Look what it was back then. And so they undervalue their program. And they undervalue the program because they're only teaching the physical side of it. And if you're only teaching the physical side of it, it's not worth much more than going to take karate at the YMCA, is because you're just going in there to get the exercise and the physical self-defense. You see, that's not what the real benefit for the kids and adults should be. It should be like a private school where we're teaching them leadership skills, where we're teaching them character, we're teaching them respect, we're teaching them discipline. Well, I developed a system, a whole program through the Junri system, where we tracked all that and rewarded them by having character worksheets that they did at home. And they got stripes on their belt for it, and they got medals and trophies at graduation for doing it. Well, now all of a sudden, these kids are helping at home. These kids are doing things around the house without their parents asking them, so they can get a self-discipline award. They're reading at home because they want to get a book club award. They're eating healthy because they want to get the healthy eating award. They have the job list that they check off the things they do each day, and they're going to get that award. And you have your practice, your martial arts practice sheet at home. So now you get stripes for practicing at home. So now we have all of these things that we don't give the parents lip service anymore. We tell them that it develops X, Y, Z, and then we show them the paperwork that the kids have done it. They've seen the kids at home to prove it, because most parents, after they're a beginner, don't sit and watch all the classes anyway. So the only way they know what they're doing is what the change in the kid they see at home. And that's what makes the biggest impact, is how you can affect their change at home, because then it directly affects the parents. And if a parent can have a child that will clean up their room and help straighten up the house and help with the dishes and take out the trash and mow the yard, or whatever their age level will allow them to do, without them even asking them, how beneficial is that for the parent? They go, "Wow, I want my kid in martial arts because look what it does for their character."
Right.
This is what they don't tell the difference, that his sidekick is better, or boy, look at that punch is so much stronger. They don't know the difference between that, but they do know when their kids' behavior changes. And
Yeah.
that's what makes the biggest impact.
Well, and one of the things that I'm thinking about as you're talking about all those character traits and the life skills and the leadership is that a lot of us as school owners maybe started out, kind of on our own, and we were the only instructor. And as we get doing this for a little while, we realize that creating a team of instructors is what helps us, get to that next level. And so now we really are teaching leadership because we're providing them with opportunities to be out on the mat and teach. And we know that if they're helping teach, they're feeling more involved, they're benefiting from the leadership skills, and potentially also creating career opportunities for them, which was not something that I remember really thinking about as early. The only way that I was going to have a career in martial arts is if I went out and opened a school. Well, now the instructors in our school can have a career teaching martial arts, and potentially we expand our programs and expand our schools to open for them. So that's another big benefit of that leadership ability, and just that path of being on the mat, being a teacher as well.
I started that instructor training program 50 years ago. And don't make the mistake of using the verbiage that you were using. You don't want to tell the students that they're teaching, that they're going to teach. What you're going to tell them is that you're going to teach them how to be an instructor. And they're going to come learn how to be an instructor. They're not going to come teach your class. See, a lot of instructors say that to their students. I want you to help teach the classes. And so that way you can learn to be an instructor. A lot of them will say, and school owners will tell me, well, I've done that. I said that. And they said to me, well, how much does it pay? And then we say, well, it doesn't pay anything, but we don't charge you extra. So the better way to say it is, part of our black belt leadership training is for you to learn the skills of an instructor. So it's like when you graduate from high school, you have the knowledge of a high school student, but you don't know how to teach it. So you have to go to college to learn how to teach that, to get certified to be a high school teacher or a middle school or an elementary. It doesn't matter, because you graduate from high school doesn't mean you can go teach elementary school. You have to be certified. You have to learn how to do it. Well, in learning how to teach those students, by learning, you have to know the martial arts that you know at a much deeper level to be able to teach it. So we find that when our students are in our leadership black belt training program, and they're doing their instructor training, which means they're learning how to be an instructor, because they're learning the techniques at so much more in depth. They now, when they test for their black belt, they are so much better on their test, because now they understand the mechanics behind the moves. They don't just know how to demonstrate it, but they know how to explain it and verbalize it, because they've seen it more, they've heard it more by helping somebody else. But that's what we're going to do in our program, is we're going to give you the confidence and teach you that public speaking, where you can stand up in front of a group of your peers and not be intimidated. You'll have the confidence. We're going to teach you that instructor voice, how to use your confidence to verbalize those commands, so you don't sound like hi class, I'm gonna teach you this. So they have to really learn how to verbalize. Well, that's all part of that black belt instructor training, and just one phase of it is that instructor certification.
Right.
To answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that definitely does. And here's another question for you from Don Angeleri. What age do you recommend starting students in a leadership type program?
Well, here's the thing, and Don, that's an excellent question, because I've heard people say, well, I don't, my kids that are 6 and under, I don't put them in our black belt leadership program. And I always say to those people, I say, why not? And they say, well, they're too young to learn. And I say, no, that's not the case. They start at a younger age, but if they can get a black belt, whatever age your black belt is able to do, that's when they become a certified instructor. In our school, you cannot be certified as an instructor till you get your first degree, but they get to train how to be an instructor before that. But the leadership skills in that leadership program is just part of their journey to black belt. And I'm going to tell you, it's easier to renew a 4 or 5 or 6 year old to black belt even than some of the teenagers, because they have more things going and get sidetracked on other activities, where those younger kids are all focused. And if the parents see the benefits of your program, they're going to want to see their kids evolve. Now, you don't just say that and give lip service. You actually have to have students that are a product of the product. See, in our school, there'll be 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds or 9-year-olds that are in the class helping with the class, and they see how these kids sound like little miniature adults. And they're so confident and strong, and they see them perform, and their technique is so sharp. Well, if you don't have that, then you've got to tell them and show them the ones that have accomplished that, even if they're teenagers. But you've got to start that program. And once we started it down with the younger kids, now they were even better at those younger ages when they're 8 or 10 or 9. You know, the youngest black belts in our school are usually like 8 to 10 years old, or the youngest, because not every kid, it normally takes about 4 years to get a black belt. But if somebody is starting at 4 years old, and in 4 years at 8, they're probably not going to be ready. It usually takes those young ones a little bit longer. That's okay. They're still working towards the black belt. You know, when people go to college, not everybody gets their degree in 4 years, even though that's the plan. Some take 5 and some take 6, and some take more classes than others and practice more and get better. Mm-hmm. Did that answer your question there, Don?
I think it's a great answer, and it's a great way to look at, you know, leadership. Teaching leadership skills can start, you know, very early on, and I think that's very different than hiring an instructor. We're talking about, you know, two different things really, of when we start them in a leadership program versus when we hire them, because obviously there's laws and things around when we hire people. But she said, yes, that does answer your question. And thank you, Dawn. We have just a couple minutes left, guys. So if anybody else is watching and you have a question for Mr. Smith, I want to make sure that you get your questions in there as well. My only question kind of goes back to your, you know, the early years of getting into full contact kickboxing. What enticed you to that, or what drew you to that, from, you know, coming from your traditional background? What made you want to get in the ring?
Well, I tell you, it's not even that I wanted to get in the ring. You have to realize in 1974, when I became the world light heavyweight kickboxing, back then they called it full contact karate, we were the first ones to do it in the U.S. There was no organized event, no organized association that was doing kickboxing or full contact karate in America. And we even had trouble to be able to put it on TV, just like the UFC did when they tried to do their no rules thing. They had to go to Colorado or somewhere. I forgot where they went, but only one state would even allow them to have it. That all the other associations, the boxing commission was controlling all of that contact type of fighting. So we had to get that. So there was no kicks below the belt, because in boxing, you didn't punch below the belt. So if we kicked below the belt, that was like dirty fighting, and they wouldn't allow that even on TV. And just like UFC, once they started seeing their extreme style of fighting, then more people loosened up on the other stuff. And now leg kicks seem very passive, right? But if you know how many people got their knees damaged and what kind of problems they ran into early on with leg kicks. See, the other thing with kicking above the belt is that it showcases flashier nicer, what I call the essence of the technique, not just the brutality of the knockout or the fight. I'd rather see, when somebody gets knocked out with a jump spinning kick, that looks a lot more spectacular than you have them on the ground and you're pounding their head into the mat. Because people out there, the spectators, look at that and they go like, wow, I could do that. That's easy. I get the guy down and I'll pound his head in the ground. But when a guy does a jump spinning something, they go like, how the hell did he do that? That's phenomenal. That's why when people watch basketball players, when they jump up and do the slam dunk like that, not everybody can do that. So that's very impressive. But remember, in basketball, they used to not have that. And that increased the spectators and the fans of basketball. Football, they used to not have a forward pass. And then all of a sudden, the forward pass, and now the guys are jumping. And now they had to change the rules because they were killing the quarterbacks and they were killing the receivers. So now they had pass interference. And now they had too much, you hit the quarterback too hard. You couldn't hit below the belt now, on the knees. And all of this added for longevity. I mean, there would be no Tom Brady had the football not changed, right? And that's why there was never quarterbacks that could last that long, because the rules didn't allow it. They got hurt too much. And that's kind of what happened with the fighting in this country. The rules are rather brutal. And it's not to say that for some people, they like to watch that style of fighting, but I still think that most of the fans out there are martial arts fans that in their schools, probably at least 80% of them don't do ground fighting. 80% of them don't allow kicks below the belt. And so they want to see 80% of our martial arts fans out there, I think, are fans of the PKA, the old school, right, that I started on. And that's when they first started it. And the only reason we started that is because of June Ray. June Ray invented that foam equipment. We started doing it in the tournaments back in 72 and 73 and 74. Before this full contact, we started hitting harder in the point tournaments. And then we started hitting so hard, they said, we're going to have to start a different vision. We're going to have to go into have a separate full contact and then keep the controls so we don't hit these guys too hard in the point, because they were getting knocked out, then they got disqualified. So it evolved into that, where I happened to be number one in the light heavyweight division at the time, and Bill was number one in the middle, and Joe Louis was number one in heavy, and Howard Jackson was number one in the lightweight. So we were the first four that represented the U.S. in that first world championship. And you can Google it and go back and see all that history and even watch those early fights. You can even Google that Kareem Allah, the Thriller Manila fight, and watch the whole thing. And we had a copy of the fight, and we had Mike Anderson and Mark Graydon did the commentary with me, and we talked about the fight and told everybody what was going on and the behind the scenes stuff. So it has a lot of special stuff in there. And, for those that want to help their business, go to martialartswealth.com and talk to Bob Dunn. He's our he'll set up your appointment with me, and I'll talk to these school owners. That's what we do for our business. We'll give you a free session, just kind of find out how your school, what your situation is, and give you some tips on how to run it. And, our job is to help martial arts schools grow, to make our industry bigger and make our industry more successful. When these schools are making more money, they can afford to pay their instructors better. They can afford to have a better facility and keep these great instructors that you have that go on and get another job because you can't pay them enough with what your school is making. Well, we've completely changed that now with these $1 million schools that we're developing. And there's a system that if you learn it, it's just like getting a black belt in your school. You get a black belt by following your instructor's testing requirements, by training on a weekly basis. So we have weekly Zoom meetings where we get to see everybody live. We have a beginner group, an intermediate group, and an advanced group, just like you do at the school. It's not a one-room schoolhouse. So there is systems that can help you get there.
Well, I really do appreciate your time and just kind of sharing with us here. Whether you're watching and you're a martial arts school owner, a martial artist, maybe one of our students, or just someone kind of checking out the video, I hope that you can appreciate all the history that we discussed today, because Jeff Smith is full of history, talking about a lot of names that bring me back and remind me, like I said at the beginning, it just makes me feel like a young kid again, getting to hear all these stories. I really truly enjoyed it, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you for sitting with me for a little bit today, and thank you to everybody that participated by asking questions, Dawn and Kevin and a couple others. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll be back on next Monday and every Monday at 12 o'clock. Please share the video and let's spread the news. Mr. Smith, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for having me. Good.
All right.
Okay, have a good day. See you.
Yeah, you too. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.